Happy Friday, everybody. Another episode of Ask Me Anything with psychotherapist Elaine Belson. And again, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box over here, right? Type them in the chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to talk about another common question that I get in therapy. And this involves when people come in not necessarily so much for themselves, but for a family member that I'm concerned about. And so one of my mantras is people have good reasons for making bad decisions. So as a therapist, part of our job is to try to understand what is the motivation behind that person's behavior. And so even though it may not seem rational, and it may be self-destructive or destructive to others, there's still an explanation for it. I always say there's an explanation, doesn't mean it's an excuse. And so if you understand the psychology behind human behavior, and then specifically what is going on psychologically with that loved one, then that can help you to understand why they're behaving the way they are and what you can do and what you have no control over as far as changing their behavior. There's a lot of things psychologically that could be going on, right? One of the things to remember is that people are usually motivated by emotion, not reason. So we're motivated by emotion first, and then reason can step into the picture, right? And help us to using basically our critical thinking skills. But our first reaction is going to be emotional. And what I find is that most people are motivated by emotion. They just don't know how to express themselves in terms of feelings. And they don't know how to manage their feelings. Think about the fact that most human beings are, right, we're motivated by emotion, and that most people don't know how to cope with their emotions or express them, right? So, and emotions aren't bad, it's just how we cope with them. And so because most people don't take a thoughtful, deliberate, proactive approach in coping with their emotions, they're more reactive, right? Then you can often find them making decisions that seem destructive toward themselves or other people, and then trying to make excuses for it after the fact. But we often respond to the rationalization and not to what's really going on. That's the underlying dynamic. And so another one of my mantras is same scene, different script. So oftentimes the underlying dynamic, how that person's behaving, how they're reacting, maybe how the two of you are interacting, and what's going on within that person, that is all the same. It's just that the content, the trigger, or whatever the context is different. So you could be arguing about, why my child doesn't have better grades, they're failing all their classes, or why my husband never wants to go out and do anything, just stays at home all the time, whether I have, a loved one that is abusing substances. That's the underlying dynamic. And so how you go about, handling that is you don't want to get sucked into the specific scenario. So, if it's a child failing their classes and you get into an argument about why that child didn't turn in their homework for that specific class, or why your husband doesn't want to go with you to a neighbor's house who's having a party, or why that person, that's maybe the person that is selling you drugs or whatever, right? Those are very specific scenarios, right? And so that can change, but the underlying dynamic, right? The scene stays the same. It's just what you're talking about or arguing about changes. So, so you never want to get sucked into having an argument over what I call content, right? You always want to get it down to the lower level, the underlying problem. And another reason why you want to do that, besides the fact that you'll be missing the real issue, you're getting sucked into a, like I said, a rationalization, is it avoids putting yourself in a power struggle with the other person, because you're not going to convince them to change their behavior. We don't convince other people. Therapists don't convince other people to change their behavior. What we do is we try to empower them to make good decisions, right? Empower them with the emotional and cognitive and behavioral coping skills, right, and insight, so that they themselves can change. They know how to they can figure it out on their own. And it doesn't work for a number of reasons. First of all, that person probably has a lot of defense mechanisms up, and so they're not likely to listen. And when you try to tell them what to do, that just creates this, again, a power struggle where they feel like they're being pressured or criticized, right? So the other reason why is because that's just not the way our brains learn. We learn through experience. And so you can't do the thinking for that other person, no matter how much, I always say, no matter how logical your argument, no matter how passionate you are, no matter how many times you repeat yourself, you cannot get somebody to change. Nobody has that kind of control over another person. So what you want to do instead is you want to help that person, empower that person to do the changing. So the brain is wired so that only a limited amount of cognitive information seeps into the emotional part of the brain. So we have the rational part of the brain, critical thinking, right? This is the prefrontal cortex. And then we have the limbic system, which is where our emotions come from. And so when you try to reason with that person, you're talking to this, but you're not talking to this, because this is emotion, and emotion doesn't change based on reason alone, right? And so if you want to get through to that person, then there's a couple of ways you can go about that. And number one is avoiding a power struggle by not trying to make suggestions or tell that person what to do. So another one of my mantras is chocolate versus vanilla ice cream. That's easy. It's an easy decision, right? But most things in life we have mixed feelings about. And that's for a reason. And that's an innate survival mechanism, because most decisions are complicated. And if we only had one feeling, then we would go with that feeling, and then we could end up, undermining ourselves or, again, somebody that we care about. So we have mixed feelings to help us to find balance, right? That's what it's all about. Balance. Balance is the essence of well-being, right? And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to help that person recognize that they have multiple feelings at the same time. They don't just feel anxious, or they don't just feel hurt. They just don't just feel angry. What I find is that most people go through life acting on feelings that they're not even aware that they have. They're not conscious of them. And so oftentimes when you see a person making a bad decision, it's usually because they went with one feeling and they ignored other feelings, right? So one of the things that you can do is you can help that loved one recognize that they have more than one feeling about whatever the problem is. There's always going to be mixed feelings about their decisions or their behaviors, even though they may not articulate that to you, and they may not even be conscious of it themselves. And that's part of the process, is helping them to be more conscious. So, for example, if I'm working with a teenager, and I am working with a teenager who's failing a number of his classes, um, the things that I'll ask him is like, well, how do you feel about failing? What does that feel like? Um, and how would you feel if you had a child that was failing, you know, 4 classes? What would you want for that child, and how would you feel about it? Um, what do you think it would feel like if you improved your grades, or if they did well on something? Say, how did that feel? How did that feel to do well on that exam? You know, or how did it feel to get praise from somebody for doing a good job? You can ask your husband, what is it about going out that you dislike so much? Again, asking him, what is the underlying need? Because chances are the reason he's not going out of the house is a coping mechanism, you know, for managing depression or anxiety. So if you can get to the underlying need of um, what it is that is motivating or provoking that desire to stay home and withdraw, then you can start talking about other ways of meeting that need, or addressing that underlying problem, whether it's anxiety or depression. If you're dealing with a spouse that never wants to go anywhere, what you need to do is understand first, what is staying home doing for them? It's serving a purpose. It's rewarding in some way. It's avoidance, and avoidance can be a very rewarding um, feeling, right? Very rewarding way of coping with things. So, so that's that. And then if we're talking about substance abuse, obviously this is very complicated. You can use what we call tough love, and you can say, um, don't ask me to do something that's not in your best interest, because I'm not going to do it. And giving you money, right? Or letting you um, use the car, if those facilitate you going out and abusing, substances, buying something, then I'm not going to do that because I care about you. So it's saying no in a loving way. With that aside, that's what we call tough love. What we're talking here about is, again, avoiding a power struggle with that person. Um, and so, you're not going to convince that person to stop using drugs. simply by lecturing them, talking to them. But you can help by asking them questions. Again, that facilitates their own insight and gets them thinking about other feelings that they have besides just the desire for the substances, substance abuse. You can try to understand a little bit better. Help me to understand, what is it that you feel, when you use, what happens right before, what feelings um, do you have right before, and then what is it about the substance? What does it do for you, right? There's an explanation, right? There's a psychological explanation that makes sense if you understand it. Get them to start exploring their own feelings about it. How does that make you feel about yourself? Is this what you envision for yourself? Is this what you envision for your future? Where do you see yourself 3 years from now? If you had a child, that was abusing substances, how would you feel about that? Um, when you don't use, when you get through a day without using, how does that feel? So getting them to realize that they do have other feelings besides the feeling that is motivating them to avoid, right? And that's why they're making bad decisions, because they're not getting in touch with those other feelings. So it's not balanced. They're not making balanced decisions based on all of their needs. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Remember to subscribe, click on the bell so that you are notified next Friday, so you don't have to remember. Next Friday, you'll get a notification at 12 noon that we're going live again and that I'm answering your questions. If you have a question, you want to pre-submit it, you can, or write it in the comment section below what your question is, and I will answer it on the air when I go live next Friday. Thank you for listening, and have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.